Let's start this way, Mr. Murren. You know the cliche about Las Vegas: when times are good, people want to come to Las Vegas and party and let their hair down. When times are bad, same thing is true. It must be so weird for you, been in the business such a long time, to see the Las Vegas Strip shut down, to see Nevada shut down. Just a weird vibe.
It's surreal, George. It's something that I could never have envisioned, could never have imagined. And it is not the Las Vegas that you and I know and the Las Vegas that I love.
You have seen crises before: 9/11, 1 October, the economic, the foreclosure crisis, all that. This is different, though. It's different. Las Vegas didn't shut down for any of those.
No, every crisis is different. And this is certainly very different than the three you mentioned. But there are threads that weave their way through different crises. And I see the threads that are being woven through here. It's going to create a different way of operating. It creates a different way of thinking. And it requires the collective energy, commitment, passion, and shared responsibility that the prior crises really demanded. But here we are. And I think Nevada and Las Vegas has responded admirably to this crisis, which is still underway. And we have to continue to treat this with the level of seriousness that it deserves.
Is it fair to say that economically, at least, Nevada is harder hit than anywhere else? In terms of the major industries, leisure and tourism, and those are shut down, and there's no way to get around it.
Yes, Nevada is the hardest hit state in the country from a standpoint of our reliance upon travel and tourism, which represents well over 40% of the entire state budget. So to the extent that people are home, people are not traveling from overseas or even within the United States, that has a profoundly painful impact on Nevada. And we see that in the very dire employment numbers that we're seeing right now. The unemployment rate skyrocketing nationwide, but Nevada has been one of the hardest hit in the country.
But health-wise, compared to other states, I mean, it's bad. 6,100 cases and a couple of hundred deaths, but we're much better off health-wise than a lot of states. And in part, it would be our major industry got the word early, and it didn't need an order to shut down. It did it on its own.
Well, I think there's a lot to be proud of during this crisis. And Nevada has fared better than people predicted, and much better than many other states. And a lot of it had to do with courage of conviction from many of the private employers. I was at MGM when we decided to shut down the entire portfolio of resorts on the Las Vegas Strip, as that was the same day that Wynn Resorts made the same very smart decision. These aren't decisions that come lightly, but they were the right decisions to make. The governor has been outstanding in his response to this pandemic. And because of early action, the impact to our state is far less than it unquestionably would have been. My family's quite active with Johns Hopkins, as an example, George. And Johns Hopkins Medicine does an incredibly robust, dynamic website every single day where you can look by county what is happening throughout the United States, and look at the modeling of where Nevada was supposed to be here in May and into June. The incident rates and the mortality rates were supposed to be multiples higher than we have currently experienced, which is not in any way to diminish the incredible pain and sadness and loss that we have had, but the outcomes would have been very, very different had the state and many of the employers not acted quickly.
Let's talk about your work with the task force. Can you describe the broad parameters of what the task force is meant to do? And I know you've made comments previously about this is hands-on. This is not a ceremonial blue ribbon advisory panel long range, but hands-on, get stuff done, right?
Well, that's right. In fact, we just got off a call about 5 minutes ago. The idea, the mission of the task force is to be a private sector response to the state's most urgent needs. What it cannot be and should not be is a answer to all the state's problems or issues. We shouldn't dig too deep. I mean, we shouldn't dig into too many different areas at once, but rather to dig deep into some areas of most urgent need. The 8 of us that are on the task force are incredibly engaged. It has become very much a mission for the task force members. We were asked early on to secure personal protective equipment. We found ourselves as a state and as a nation completely ill-prepared for this pandemic. And we were given a list that was very daunting. The hundreds of thousands of items, millions of items of masks, gloves, gowns, personal protective equipment. And we're at a little state, and we're fighting bigger states and also the federal government and other countries to get this very same equipment. And so we ignited the procurement channels of MGM China, Wynn, Macau, and Las Vegas Sands China. They dug deep into Asia, into China, and we were able to, through their efforts, as well as NV Energy and Nevada Gold Mines, really punch way above our weight. We have now purchased well over $10 million worth of this equipment. That equipment comes into our state. It goes into state-owned warehouses, and the National Guard is distributing it throughout the rural and urban communities. All that personal protective equipment was purchased with philanthropic dollars. And so we raised, in a matter of 2 weeks, over $10 million. That money raised saved lives, because had we not had that money, you couldn't have executed a purchase order, and they wouldn't even talk to you as a manufacturer unless you had 10% money down as a deposit, or 20, or 40, or 50. In some cases, 100% of the money had to be paid up front. And that was long before the CARES Act was passed, before the state had access to any funds. And we just wouldn't have been able to get that equipment earlier. So the task force was first focused on PPE. For the past month, I've been working really hard with the task force and the working group on testing. And I've become quite passionate about the need to do broad-based testing in Nevada. In fact, I would make the point that testing is not simply a response to this public health crisis, but I think it is a building block for a sustained economic recovery. Without testing, we're not going to really know the health environment in the state. Without testing, we're not going to be able to change outcomes as rapidly. And without testing, it's going to be very difficult for us to attract conventions, sport teams, concert goers, tourists to Nevada without having that investment in health infrastructure in the state.
I had seen an interview that you did with the Nevada Indy in which you discussed the difficulties of securing PPEs, that you ran into some devious characters, that at least in the back of your mind, you had to worry about federal agencies seizing what Nevada would get. Is that true?
It's been a food fight. It's been chaotic. And early on, in late March and then in early April, we were inundated by helpful people that had access to N95 or KN95 masks. For your viewers, those would be the respirator masks that are absolutely vital protective equipment for health responders, anyone in contact with someone with a viral load such as COVID. And incredibly hard to find. They're not made in the United States to any appropriate quantity any longer. They're made mostly in China. And to go deep into the China network and to try to find FDA approved, NIOSH or another agency approved mask was very, very difficult. And many well-intentioned people in the United States, including state governments, got completely, utterly laid away by counterfeit masks, by gouging from unscrupulous characters. And we had a couple orders ourselves that we had secured. We knew they were qualified masks. We knew they were from the right manufacturer. And right in the middle of the purchase order, the masks vanished. And so we know and have heard horror stories of masks going to a port of demarcation in China, never getting on the ships or on the planes. We've heard about masks that have been commandeered, have been stolen once they arrived in the United States. Fortunately for us, because of WIN, SANS, MGM, NV Energy, Nevada Gold, which has reached into Europe and in Africa, we've had much better outcomes than I think we would have otherwise.
And a lot of that boils down to relationships, right? You have businesses and business interests. There's a reciprocal relationships there for the companies that you've mentioned, the business interests that you mentioned, and that goes a long way when you're trying to get something like this done.
I moved to Las Vegas over 22 years ago, and my idol was the founder of MGM, Kirk Kerkorian, who taught me so many lessons in life and business lessons. But one of the most important lessons he taught me early was that relationships matter, and treating others as you'd like to be treated, being a good counterparty, being a good partner with people on the other side of a transaction. And no one was better than Kirk Kerkorian at doing that. He did hundreds of deals, could have been 1,000. And you won't find anyone that has ever said a bad thing about Kirk Kerkorian. Relationships do matter. After 9/11, I was in San Francisco that day, driving back to Las Vegas, and going into what ultimately became my office, but it was Terry Lanny's office. Terry watching the news unfold, and he said, Jim, relationships will matter. And some people will rise to the occasion. Some people will let you down. And, but we're America, we're going to come out of this. That was, those are prescient words by Terry Lanny, echoed by what Mr. Kerkorian taught me about relationships. And then that's what happened. During the Great Recession in Las Vegas, MGM was counted out by everybody. We were building City Center at the time. People thought that that was going to go bankrupt and bring MGM down into bankruptcy along with it. Relationships that Mr. Kerkorian had developed, that I had helped foster. Relationships mattered. And relationships matter here. We reached out, I and others on the task force reached out to friends and business associates, and sometimes adversaries in China, in the UAE, in Europe, in Japan. So we need help. And people call us back. And that has helped us here at the task force, is at least getting into the consciousness of people that could help us. And I think that has helped the state do a bit better than it would have been otherwise.
Will you characterize where we stand then on PPEs? We're good for now, and more are coming. Is there an anticipation that there might be a second wave in the fall, and do we need more for that?
Well, we've caught up to what the state had asked us to acquire. And we've also helped the large hospital organizations with the contacts that we've developed so that they can in turn use are channels to go out and buy PPE on their own. In that case, they have the capital to buy the supplies. They were just having a hard time finding that. So I feel pretty good about where we are in terms of this pipeline is open. We should continue to fill that pipeline, though, and continue to buy PPE, and dare I even say stockpile some, because we don't know what's going to happen. And we should never get ourselves in the position that we were in 2 months ago. So the task force will continue to acquire PPE, and also to anticipate what this recovery looks like in Nevada, and getting our kids back to school. So as an example, we're working on orders to get our educational providers PPE, administrators, teachers, folks working in the school district when the kids go back to school. What does public services look like? Not just the critical PPE for their first responders, but other public agencies that have been furloughed, that will be coming back online as we continue to progress. What kind of supplies can we provide to them? And of course, continue to help the first responders. So I believe that we're going to continue to acquire PPE. We're also looking at face coverings. These would be non-medical grade masks that we as Nevadans should wear. We should respect one another. We should respect each other's health, and we should take shared responsibility in recovery. And that means wearing a face covering. And so the task force is reaching deep into the gaming world to find manufacturers that gaming companies have used to buy face coverings that we will help the nonprofit communities in the state, as well as to provide them to Nevadans as they're going about their daily commerce.
As with everything else these days, wearing masks, not wearing masks, it becomes tribal identity, political identity, partisan issue, with people not only refusing to wear masks, but giving a bad time to people who do. What do you do about that?
I really struggle with this. I really struggle with the idea that a point of view could be that it is our right as Americans to put others at risk. I mean, that's basically what the message is. I don't feel like I need to make any sacrifice in order to help one another. And I really I'm opposed to that point of view. I understand that this has been an incredibly trying time for all of us, for Nevadans. But I think that we're losing sight of the debate. This shouldn't be a debate between is public health and the economy. It should be a shared responsibility. There's no doubt that anyone that has studied this for more than 10 minutes, there's no doubt that if we do not have strong public health underpinnings to our economic recovery plan, the economy will not sustainably recover. It's economics 101 that business activity is based on consumer confidence. If consumers lack the confidence to conduct daily business, to enjoy being outside or being with friends or shopping or going to restaurants, if that confidence remains low because of fear, because incident rates spike up again, then there is no business that can recover. We just have to understand that, I think, that we're aligned here, that business confidence, consumer confidence is what we should all be shooting for here. That should be our goal, because that will lead to not only a recovery, but a sustained recovery. And in a state like Nevada, where over 40% of our budget, the budget that takes care of our kids in school, that keeps us safe, 40% of that budget is tourism. How could we not believe that that is, a shared responsibility to make us as safe as possible? And it really shouldn't be a partisan issue, in my opinion, or a north-south issue, or a freedom of speech issue, when the real issue is, are we all going to work together to try to recover together?
What about testing? So I've heard you quoted as saying a goal would be 30,000 tests a day. I think the total yesterday was something like 3,000. Sounds like it's a long way to go. Is it doable? And how soon?
So testing is vital to not only the health response, but I believe to the economic recovery. Because if you had enough testing capacity, then people could more voluntarily get tested. Because of a variety of choke points in the Nevada testing model, we haven't been able to test to the degree that any healthcare professional or economics a professor would say would be appropriate for the state. We've only tested people that are grossly symptomatic, people that most likely have had or have the virus. If in fact testing is an economic imperative, as I posit it is, it would be really important for employers to be able to provide testing to their employees, to understand the health environment of their employees. It would be in turn very valuable and comforting for those employees to know, their health status. The reason why we haven't done that is we just didn't have the capacity. Most of the testing in Nevada has been conducted by out-of-state labs. The tests are actually, processed in California or Arizona, which is why after you've done a test, it could take you 2 to 14 days to get your test result back, which makes the test almost worthless, because you can test negative for COVID today, and before you get your test back, you could have been infected by the virus. By having adequate in-state test labs, which we're building up in the state today, you'll be able to get your test results back within 12 hours, maybe even within 4 hours. UMC is building up a tremendous capacity right now. A month ago, they were only testing 100 or 200 people a day. They have the capacity today to test 4,000 people a day. And by the end of this month, 10,000 people a day. Their inhibiting factor, like any other testing lab, is, do you have enough of what's called the consumables? Do you have swabs? Do you have reagents? Do you have all the building blocks that go into the test itself? And I'm happy to say that UMC, with a little bit of help from the task force, has been able to dramatically scale up its inventory of test kits and consumables, so that we'll be able to comfortably test as many as 10,000 people a day starting June 1. The same thing is happening up at the Nevada State Public Health Lab in Reno, run by Dr. Pendori. He, again, was doing a few hundred tests a day a month ago. He has a similar goal, to be able to test 10,000 people a day up in the Reno area, and Renown, the great public health hospital up north, is also building up its testing capacity. I believe that by June 1, we will have the capacity to test as many as 30,000 people a day, which doesn't mean we will test 30,000 every single day, but that capacity will be there so that employers, public and private employers, can make that testing available to its employees, and they can help schedule the recovery plans of the resorts, restaurants, retail centers as they open up more more efficiently.
The road to recovery. So you've been sort of bullish on it. You think Las Vegas can bounce back pretty quickly. Can you describe that scenario, what it's going to take, why it makes sense that Las Vegas could at least rebound to something close to normalcy? And I ask it also in this context is today, Governor Sisolak declared a financial or fiscal emergency, that the gaming revenues, the overall revenues are going to drop something like $900 million. The state is not going to have resources to do all the things that it would normally do.
It gets to the economic question we were talking about, that 40-odd% of our state budget is gaming. And we've never been in a situation where all the casinos have been closed. That's just a devastating impact to not only the men and women that have been furloughed, that have been laid off, but the state budget itself. When you rely at 4 out of every $10 coming from one industry, and that just stops overnight, we never could have been prepared for that. We have many disadvantages in Nevada from a standpoint of being small, being too reliant on 1 or 2 industries, not diversified as much as we could or should, and I think will going forward. But we have a couple big advantages, particularly in Las Vegas versus other cities. One is there's a high concentration of employees and properties in a handful of companies. In this case, this is a very positive development because in a relatively small room, you can bring in most of the large employers, and they are working very, very closely together right now. In my quarter of a century in Las Vegas, I haven't seen the kind of collaboration that I'm seeing right now, sharing best practices on public health, on safety protocols, on security, on HVAC systems, or air conditioning and cooling systems, and other infrastructure protocols that they're learning around the world. So collaboration is very valuable. Secondly, highly regulated industry. The Gaming Control Board, chaired by Chair Morgan, who I think is an incredible leader of the Gaming Control Board, has very, very rigorous standards they're going to hold all the licensees accountable to. All the licensees have to submit public health plans to the state at least 7 days before they open. Those plans are being submitted right now. The state will hold those companies accountable to their public health plans, which you would not see as a rigorous regulatory oversight in many other forms of hospitality. Thirdly, we have a very strong relationship between the private sector and the state. And we're a relatively small state, which works to our advantage in the sense that the state is working with the private sector on the recovery plans. And fortunately, because we have not been hit as hard as other states in the country, we can put a little more focus on the strategy of recovery. We're not in as much of a crisis mode as many of our natural competitors. And finally, and this is the important point, this goes back to my point on testing. We can go to the professional sports leagues, which we are. We can go to the major conventions that want to be in other convention cities. And we can say, here is our health plan. This is how the Las Vegas Convention Center is going to be operated. This is how it's going to look at T-Mobile and at Allegiant Stadium. This is how the airport is dealing with this crisis. And here are the collective plans in summary form of the Venetian and Caesars and Wynn and MGM, and we want your business. That's going to be very compelling as the U.S. comes out of this crisis and people start getting back to the business of conventions or going back to their forms of entertainment. And that's why I believe Las Vegas will actually come out of that component of it a little bit sooner than others. And remember, over half the folks that come to Las Vegas are driving there. And they're going to come. And on an international travel, a lot of the big revenue that drives a lot of gaming taxes that we need in the state come from the high rollers. And boy, they want to come, and they're ready to come. And so you might not see as many people in Las Vegas. Certainly you won't early on. But I think you'll be surprised on some of the table game revenue that will be taxed to the coffers of the state because of the high roller business that I think will come.